Your cells are dying faster than they should be right now. Not from a disease you can treat with medication, not from a genetic condition you inherited from your parents, but from a behavioral pattern that is accelerating biological aging at every level of your physiology. This pattern is shrinking telomeres, increasing oxidative stress, promoting chronic inflammation, and impairing cellular repair mechanisms that are essential for longevity. And the most alarming part is that this threat is not on anyone's radar. Your doctor is not screening for it at your annual physical. Public health campaigns are not warning about it. And most people engage in this life-shortening behavior every single day without recognizing the catastrophic impact it is having on their lifespan. Doctors and researchers studying longevity have identified this single factor as one of the most powerful predictors of early mortality, stronger than many traditional risk factors, including cholesterol levels, blood pressure, and body weight. The data is overwhelming, and the mechanism is well understood. Chronic loneliness and social isolation are killing people prematurely through biological pathways that damage every organ system in the body. This is not about feeling sad or missing companionship, though those experiences matter. This is about the physiological stress response that occurs when human beings, who evolved as intensely social creatures, exist without adequate social connection. Your nervous system, immune system, and endocrine system are being dysregulated by isolation in ways that accelerate aging and increase mortality risk by 30 to 50%. And the crisis is getting worse as modern life becomes increasingly isolating. Hi, I am Dr. Alex. I am an emergency medicine doctor, and after nearly 10 years in the emergency department, I have seen the devastating health consequences of social isolation manifest as heart attacks, strokes, severe depression, and rapid functional decline in patients who live alone without meaningful social connection. The pattern is unmistakable once you recognize it. Isolated patients have worse outcomes from every medical condition, slower recovery from illness and injury, and higher mortality rates compared to socially connected patients with identical diagnoses. My goal now is to help people understand that loneliness is not just an emotional experience, but a lethal biological stressor that must be addressed as seriously as smoking or obesity. And I want to take just a few seconds here to make you a promise. I promise to keep creating the most helpful videos I possibly can, grounded in the latest research and science, to help you live longer and healthier lives. And all I ask in return is that you give this fairly new channel a chance and hit the subscribe button. If you get to the end of this video and you did not think it was worth your time, or you have not learned something new, then feel free to unsubscribe. No hard feelings. But if you give me your time and your attention, I will give you everything I have learned from over a decade in medicine. So please help me out. Hit the subscribe button to help this channel reach more people like you, and let us continue with the video. Before we talk about how loneliness damages health and shortens lifespan, we need to understand what loneliness actually is from a biological perspective and why it exists as a human experience. Loneliness is not simply being alone. Many people live alone and are not lonely, while others are surrounded by people yet feel profoundly isolated. Loneliness is the subjective experience of social disconnection, the feeling that you lack meaningful relationships where you are known, valued, and supported. From an evolutionary perspective, loneliness serves as a biological alarm system. For hundreds of thousands of years, human survival depended on being part of a social group. Isolation from the tribe meant vulnerability to predators, inability to hunt large game, lack of protection during illness or injury, and severely reduced chances of survival and reproduction. Natural selection favored individuals whose nervous systems generated distress signals when they became isolated, motivating them to reconnect with the group. This is why loneliness feels aversive. It is designed to hurt, to create urgency, to drive you back towards social connection. The problem is that the biological stress response triggered by loneliness, which was adaptive when it motivated reconnection in ancestral environments, becomes pathological when it persists chronically in modern environments, where reconnection may not be possible or may require sustained effort over extended periods. When you feel lonely, your brain interprets this as a threat to survival. Your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis activates, releasing cortisol and other stress hormones. Your sympathetic nervous system engages, raising heart rate and blood pressure. Your immune system shifts toward a pro-inflammatory state that was designed to fight infections from wounds sustained without the protection of a group. These responses are appropriate for short-term social isolation. But when loneliness becomes chronic, lasting months or years, these stress responses remain activated continuously, causing cumulative damage to every physiological system. Research published in Perspectives on Psychological Science analyzed data from 148 studies, including over 300,000 participants across multiple countries, and found that social isolation and loneliness increased the risk of early death by 26 to 32%. This effect was comparable to the mortality risk associated with smoking 15 cigarettes per day or being an alcoholic, and it exceeded the mortality risk associated with obesity or physical inactivity. The finding was consistent across different populations, age groups, and initial health statuses, demonstrating that the effect is robust and not explained by confounding variables. Subsequent meta-analyses have confirmed these results and identified specific mechanisms through which loneliness damages health and shortens lifespan. The first mechanism involves chronic stress activation and cortisol elevation. When you are lonely, your body remains in a state of vigilance and threat anticipation. Cortisol, which should spike only during acute stress and then return to baseline, remains chronically elevated. Over time, elevated cortisol damages the hippocampus, which is the brain region responsible for memory and stress regulation. It suppresses immune function, making you more vulnerable to infections and impairing wound healing. It promotes abdominal fat accumulation, which drives metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance. It raises blood pressure and promotes atherosclerosis by damaging blood vessel walls. And it disrupts sleep architecture, preventing the deep restorative sleep stages where cellular repair occurs. Studies measuring cortisol levels throughout the day have found that lonely individuals show flattened cortisol rhythms with elevated evening levels, a pattern associated with accelerated aging and increased disease risk. The second mechanism involves immune dysregulation and chronic inflammation. Loneliness triggers a shift in gene expression patterns in immune cells toward increased production of pro-inflammatory cytokines and decreased production of antiviral proteins. Research led by Dr. Steve Cole at UCLA found that lonely individuals showed increased expression of genes involved in inflammation and decreased expression of genes involved in antibody production and antiviral responses. This pattern, termed conserved transcriptional response to adversity, is a primitive immune response designed for environments where social isolation meant high risk of physical injury requiring rapid wound healing. The chronic inflammation driven by this response accelerates atherosclerosis, promotes insulin resistance, damages neurons, and increases cancer risk. Lonely individuals have significantly higher levels of inflammatory markers, including C-reactive protein and interleukin-6, compared to socially connected individuals, and these elevated inflammatory markers predict cardiovascular events, cognitive decline, and mortality. The third mechanism involves cardiovascular damage. The combination of chronic stress, elevated cortisol, and systemic inflammation creates a perfect storm for cardiovascular disease. Loneliness increases blood pressure through sustained sympathetic nervous system activation. Studies have found that lonely individuals have systolic blood pressure 5 to 10 millimeters of mercury, higher than non-lonely individuals, an increase that significantly raises stroke and heart attack risk. Loneliness also promotes endothelial dysfunction by reducing nitric oxide production, making blood vessels less able to dilate and increasing arterial stiffness. Research published in Heart tracked over 108,000 adults for more than 10 years and found that loneliness and social isolation were associated with 29% increased risk of heart attack and 32% increased risk of stroke. These effects persisted after controlling for traditional cardiovascular risk factors, including smoking, blood pressure, cholesterol, and diabetes, indicating that loneliness is an independent cardiovascular risk factor of major significance. The fourth mechanism involves impaired sleep quality. Loneliness disrupts sleep through multiple pathways. The threat vigilance associated with loneliness keeps the sympathetic nervous system activated, making it difficult to achieve the parasympathetic relaxation required for deep sleep. Lonely individuals report more sleep fragmentation, more difficulty falling asleep, and less restorative sleep compared to socially connected individuals. Research using actigraphy and polysomnography to objectively measure sleep has confirmed that lonely people spend less time in slow-wave sleep, which is the deep sleep stage essential for cellular repair, immune function, and metabolic regulation. Poor sleep further compounds the health damage from loneliness by impairing glucose metabolism, increasing inflammation, and accelerating cognitive decline. The bidirectional relationship between loneliness and poor sleep creates a vicious cycle where each exacerbates the other. The fifth mechanism involves behavioral changes that occur in response to loneliness. Lonely individuals are more likely to engage in unhealthy behaviors, including poor diet, physical inactivity, smoking, and excessive alcohol consumption. They are less likely to adhere to medical treatments and less likely to seek preventive care. Research suggests these behavioral changes are partly driven by the motivational deficits and anhedonia that accompany chronic loneliness, as well as the lack of social accountability and support that normally encourages healthy behaviors. When you live alone and have no one checking on you or encouraging you to take care of yourself, it becomes easier to neglect health maintenance. Studies have found that lonely individuals consume more high-calorie processed foods, exercise less frequently, and have lower medication adherence compared to socially connected individuals, and these behavioral differences mediate some but not all of the health effects of loneliness. The sixth mechanism involves accelerated biological aging at the cellular level. Research measuring telomere length, which is a marker of cellular aging, has found that lonely individuals have significantly shorter telomeres compared to socially connected individuals of the same chronological age. Telomeres are protective caps on the ends of chromosomes that shorten with each cell division. When telomeres become critically short, cells can no longer divide and either die or become senescent, which means they stop functioning and start secreting inflammatory compounds that damage surrounding tissues. Short telomeres predict earlier onset of age-related diseases and shorter lifespan. Studies have found that the difference in telomere length between lonely and non-lonely individuals corresponds to approximately 7 to 10 years of biological aging, meaning loneliness ages you at the cellular level as much as a decade of chronological time. Now, when we understand how loneliness damages health through these 6 biological mechanisms, chronic stress and cortisol elevation, immune dysregulation and inflammation, cardiovascular damage, impaired sleep, unhealthy behavioral changes, and accelerated cellular aging, we automatically understand what is required to protect against these effects. The intervention is not medication or surgery. The intervention is deliberately building and maintaining meaningful social connections that provide emotional support, practical assistance, and a sense of belonging. Research has identified several types of social connection that protect health and extend lifespan. The first is intimate relationships, including marriage or long-term partnerships, close friendships, and family bonds, where deep emotional connection and mutual support exist. The second is social integration, which refers to participation in social networks and community activities, including religious organizations, clubs, volunteer work, or regular social gatherings. The third is perceived social support, which is the subjective feeling that help would be available if needed, even if that help is rarely called upon. Studies comparing the health effects of different types of social connection have found that both the quantity and quality of relationships matter, but quality appears to be more important than quantity. Having 1 or 2 relationships characterized by trust, mutual understanding, and emotional intimacy provides more health protection than having many superficial acquaintances. Research published in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences found that individuals who reported high-quality social relationships in early adulthood and midlife had better cardiovascular health, lower inflammation, and longer lifespans compared to those with poor quality relationships, regardless of the total number of social contacts they maintained. This suggests that the critical factor is not how many people you know, but whether you have relationships where you feel truly known, valued, and supported. For individuals who find themselves lonely or socially isolated, the pathway to rebuilding connection requires deliberate action over sustained periods. Social connection does not happen passively, particularly for adults whose social networks have contracted due to retirement, relocation, loss of spouse, or other life transitions. The first step is recognizing loneliness as a serious health threat that warrants the same level of intervention you would apply to high blood pressure or elevated cholesterol. This reframing helps overcome the shame or stigma that often prevents people from acknowledging loneliness and seeking connection. The second step is identifying opportunities for regular social interaction through structured activities. Joining clubs, taking classes, volunteering for causes you care about, participating in religious or spiritual communities, or attending community events creates repeated exposure to the same people, which is essential for relationship formation. Research shows that friendship formation requires approximately 50 hours of interaction to develop casual friendships and 200 hours or more to develop close friendships, meaning that brief occasional contact is insufficient. Regular sustained interaction is required. The third step is developing the skills and mindset that facilitate connection. This includes learning to initiate conversations, showing genuine interest in others through active listening, being willing to share aspects of your own experience and vulnerability, and following up to maintain contact over time. For individuals who struggle with social anxiety or who have been isolated for extended periods, working with a therapist who specializes in social skills training or cognitive behavioral therapy can provide structured support for developing these capabilities. The fourth step is being patient with the process. Meaningful relationships develop over months and years, not weeks. The loneliness epidemic will not be solved by quick fixes or superficial interventions. It requires cultural shifts that prioritize social connection as a fundamental determinant of health and individual commitment to investing time and effort into building and maintaining relationships. Let me bring this back to the emergency department because I want you to see the real-world consequences of chronic loneliness. I treated an 81-year-old man who came in with pneumonia. He lived alone and had no regular contact with family or friends. The pneumonia had been developing for over a week before he sought help, and by the time he arrived, he was severely septic and required ICU admission. His immune system, compromised by years of loneliness-induced inflammation and stress, could not fight the infection effectively. He spent 3 weeks in the hospital and never fully recovered his baseline function. After discharge, he went to a nursing home because he could no longer care for himself independently. His medical history showed chronic hypertension, diabetes, and depression, all of which were likely worsened by his social isolation. If he had maintained regular social connections, someone would have noticed his illness earlier, encouraged him to seek treatment sooner, and possibly prevented the cascade that led to permanent functional decline. Another patient was a 67-year-old woman who suffered a stroke. She had been widowed 5 years earlier and had become progressively isolated, rarely leaving her home and having minimal contact with others. Her stroke was moderately severe, affecting her left side. During her hospitalization, she had no visitors. During rehabilitation, she had no one to practice with or encourage her. Her recovery was slow and incomplete, and she struggled with depression and motivation. Research shows that stroke patients with strong social support recover more function and have better long-term outcomes compared to isolated patients with similar stroke severity. Social connection is not just about preventing disease. It is about enhancing recovery and resilience when illness or injury occurs. The bigger picture here is that loneliness has become a public health crisis of extraordinary magnitude. Surveys conducted across Western nations show that the percentage of adults reporting frequent loneliness has increased dramatically over recent decades. In the United States, more than 1/3 of adults over 45 report feeling lonely, and the rates are even higher among older adults, with approximately half of adults over 80 experiencing significant loneliness. This epidemic is driven by structural changes in society, including increased geographic mobility that separates families, longer working hours that reduce time for social connection, technology that creates the illusion of connection through social media while actually reducing face-to-face interaction, and the dissolution of traditional community institutions, including churches, civic organizations, and neighborhood networks. The result is a population that is more isolated than at any previous point in human history, and the health consequences are catastrophic. So here is the bottom line, and this is what I really want you to take away from this. Chronic loneliness and social isolation are shrinking your lifespan through 6 biological mechanisms, including chronic stress and cortisol elevation, immune dysregulation and inflammation, cardiovascular damage, impaired sleep, unhealthy behavioral changes, and accelerated cellular aging. The mortality risk associated with loneliness is comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes per day and exceeds the risk from obesity or physical inactivity. This is not an emotional issue that you can ignore if you feel fine. This is a physiological emergency that is damaging your health right now, whether you feel it or not. The intervention is building and maintaining meaningful social connections, characterized by trust, emotional intimacy, and mutual support. This requires deliberate effort, including joining groups and organizations that provide regular interaction, developing social skills that facilitate connection, being patient with the slow process of relationship formation, and prioritizing social connection as a fundamental health behavior as important as diet and exercise. Doctors are alarmed by the loneliness epidemic because the data is unambiguous. Social isolation is killing people prematurely, and the crisis is worsening. The time to address this is now, before years of isolation cause irreversible damage. And finally, just to end, please subscribe to the channel if you found this useful to help me reach more people like you.